The transport vessel shuddered as it docked with the orbital station, and Marcus Webb felt the magnetic clamps engage with a heavy thunk that resonated through the deck plating. He stood in the cargo bay, surrounded by crates of mining equipment and geological survey tools, watching as the airlock cycled open. Beyond the threshold, the station's interior gleamed with sterile white panels and harsh lighting that made him squint after 3 weeks in the dimmer confines of the transport. A Vathari administrator waited on the other side, its forearms clasped in what Marcus had learned was their species' equivalent of a formal greeting. The alien's chitinous exterior reflected the overhead lights in shades of deep violet and blue. Human Web, the administrator clicked, its translator rendering the sounds into flat, mechanical English. Your assignment begins immediately. You will proceed to mining platform 7 in the asteroid belt. The journey takes 4 standard days. Marcus nodded, shouldering his personal kit. Understood. I was told there would be additional equipment. The Vathari's mandibles twitched in what might have been amusement. Yes, the company has provided you with a guardian. Given the isolation of Platform 7 and the dangers inherent in solo mining operations, all human workers in remote assignments now receive protection. Something in the way the administrator said protection made Marcus uneasy. He followed the alien through a series of corridors until they reached a holding area. Behind a reinforced transparent barrier, something moved in the shadows. This is your guardian, the Vathari said. A Kethron, female, declawed and defanged according to Galactic Labor Protocol 773. She is bound by neural collar to ensure compliance. The creature stepped into the light, and Marcus felt his breath catch. She stood nearly 7 feet tall, her body covered in sleek fur that shifted between gray and silver depending on the angle of the light. Her face was elongated, almost feline, with large eyes that glowed amber in the dimness. Those eyes fixed on him with an intelligence that made his skin prickle. Heavy chains connected her wrists to a collar around her neck, and he could see the blinking lights of the neural device embedded in the metal. This is barbaric, Marcus said quietly. The Vathari administrator's translator was silent for a moment. She is a predator. Her species nearly wiped out the Vathari colonies in the outer reach before we subdued them. Would you prefer to work alone, human? The choice is yours. Refuse, and your contract is void. Marcus looked at the Kethran again. She hadn't moved, but her eyes tracked every motion he made. There was no aggression in her posture, but he could see the tension in her frame, the coiled strength held in check by invisible bonds. I'll take the assignment, he said. The journey to Platform 7 was silent. The Kethran, whose designation code translated roughly to Vara in human phonetics, sat in the corner of the small transport pod with her chains pooled around her feet. Marcus tried to speak to her several times, but she never responded, never even acknowledged his attempts at communication. The neural collar's lights pulsed steadily, and he wondered what thoughts were being suppressed behind those amber eyes. Platform 7 was exactly as isolated as promised. The facility consisted of a central habitat module, processing equipment, and a small shuttle bay, all perched on an asteroid roughly 8 kilometers in diameter. The nearest occupied station was 3 days away at maximum burn. Marcus spent the first week establishing his routine: survey the asteroid surface, set drilling charges, process the extracted ore, and transmit the yield reports back to the company. Vara followed him everywhere, a silent shadow that never interfered with his work, but never strayed far from his side. At night, in the cramped quarters of the habitat module, Marcus would lie awake listening to the faint hum of life support systems. Vara had claimed a corner of the common area, curling up on the floor despite the perfectly functional bunk he'd tried to offer her. The chains made soft clicking sounds when she moved. On the 14th day, everything changed. Marcus was outside in his EVA suit, setting charges in a promising vein of rare earth minerals, when the proximity alarm shrieked in his helmet. He looked up to see a vessel he didn't recognize dropping out of thrust about 2 kilometers above the asteroid's surface. It was sleek and dark, without any identification markings. "Platform 7 to approaching vessel," Marcus transmitted. "You're in a restricted mining zone. Identify yourself." The response was a burst of weapons fire that tore into the asteroid surface 50 meters from his position. Marcus ran, or tried to, bounding across the low-gravity terrain in desperate leaps. Behind him, he could hear the whistle of atmosphere escaping from punctured equipment. The raiders were landing. He made it back to the airlock and cycled through in record time, his hands shaking as he pulled off his helmet. Vara stood in the corridor, her posture different now, alert and focused. The neural collar's lights were flashing red. "Raiders," Marcus gasped. "They're coming." The habitat module shook as the raiders breached the shuttle bay. Marcus grabbed the emergency locker and pulled out the only weapon on the platform, a mining laser cutter, designed to slice through rock, not repel armed attackers. He could hear boots clanging on metal deck plating, getting closer. Vara moved to stand between Marcus and the corridor entrance. She looked back at him once, and he saw something in her eyes he hadn't seen before: purpose. The first raider came through the doorway with a plasma rifle raised. He was humanoid, possibly Telgari, based on the facial ridges, and he barely had time to register Vara's presence before she moved. Even chained, even with the neural collar fighting her every instinct, she was faster than anything Marcus had ever witnessed. She used the chains as weapons, whipping them around the raider's rifle and yanking it from his grasp. Her shoulder drove into his chest with enough force to send him sprawling back into his companions. 2 more raiders pushed through, firing wildly. Vara twisted and spun, the chains singing through the air. Marcus saw the neural collar sparking now, saw the way Vara's movements hitched and jerked as the device tried to suppress her aggression. She was fighting through pain that would have dropped most beings. Marcus raised the mining laser and fired, the beam catching one raider across the arm. The smell of burned flesh filled the corridor. The raiders fell back, regrouping, and Marcus knew they'd come again with heavier weapons. "The collar," Marcus said suddenly. He moved to Vara's side, his fingers finding the release mechanism. "I'm taking it off." Vara's head whipped around, her amber eyes wide. For the first time, she spoke, her voice rough and layered with harmonics that the translator struggled to render. "No, I will kill. Cannot control." "I trust you," Marcus said, and pressed the release. The collar fell away with a clatter of metal on deck plating. Vara stood perfectly still for 3 heartbeats, then rolled her shoulders as if testing her own body. When she looked at Marcus again, her eyes were clear. "Get behind me, human," she said, "and do not look." The raiders came in force, 6 of them, with military-grade weapons and armor. Marcus crouched behind the equipment locker and did exactly as Vara had instructed. He heard sounds he would never be able to describe, would never want to remember. Screams, the wet sounds of impact, the sizzle of energy weapons firing and missing their target. When silence fell, Marcus slowly stood. Vara stood in the corridor, breathing hard, her fur matted with blood that wasn't hers. The raiders were down, disarmed, unconscious, or worse. She had used the chains with surgical precision, her movements no longer hindered by artificial restraints. "The ship," Vara said, her voice steady despite her exertion. "More may come." Together, they secured the raider vessel and sent a distress signal on company frequencies. Then they waited, sitting in the habitat module's common area. Marcus looked at the neural collar lying on the floor between them. "You could leave," he said quietly. "Take their ship. Go anywhere." Vara was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her words were careful, measured. My people are scattered, enslaved or dead. I have nowhere to go. You could go anyway. Be free." She looked at him with those amber eyes, and Marcus saw something that might have been gratitude, or sadness, or both. "You gave me choice. First of your kind to do so. This means something to my people. Honor, debt. You don't owe me anything. Not debt like trade," Vara corrected. "Debt like pack. Like family. You freed me when you needed me most. You trusted when you had no reason to trust. This is not forgotten." The rescue ships arrived 36 hours later. Company security and Galactic Patrol both. The raiders were identified as part of a mining claim-jumping operation that had hit a dozen remote platforms. Marcus gave his statement a dozen times, watching as officials examined the scene and took hollows of the damage. A Galactic Patrol officer approached him on the second day, a Vothri, like the administrator who had given him this assignment. "The Kethron cannot remain with you," the officer said. "She must be processed and reassigned." Marcus looked at Vara, who stood near the Habitat Module's viewing port, watching the stars. "And if I request her assignment remain unchanged?" The officer's mandibles clicked with something that sounded like surprise. "You wish to continue working with an unchained predator? She saved my life. I trust her more than I trust any of your Protoko.